Hello, everyone. We are joined today by Meredith Sarason, who has another success story for us. Since childhood, Meredith experienced evolving health issues and chronic infections, culminating in over a decade of debilitating chronic migraines, persistent headaches, brain fog, generalized anxiety, severe sensitivities to food, scents, stress, and environmental stimuli. Meredith credits her healing to brain retraining, a devoted self-care practice, and learning to honor her body's needs, her inner and doing inner work, including Primal Trust. She also did a nourishing diet, lifestyle changes, and today Meredith lives freely and in balance with her body. Inspired by her own healing journey, Meredith became a certified health and wellness coach and created Inner Compass Health, which is a coaching practice empowering givers and doers facing life-disrupting stress and chronic conditions to harness their innate capacity to heal and live their purpose. Welcome, Meredith. It's so nice to finally get to have this interview with you. We've been talking about it for a long time.
So happy to be here, Dr. Kat.
It's really always amazing for me. Meredith was one of our early members of Primal Trust when I had my second round of the mentorship, and I remember her from, was it 2021 that I think
We
we
think so,
met?
yeah.
Yep. And to see her now, years later, also out there thriving, supporting others, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the whole thing turn around and now you're giving to others. So, um, why don't you let our listeners know, first of all, what it was, what you were, I know I named a lot of your diagnoses, but what was life like? What were you dealing with? How did your healing journey begin? And just share your story.
Sure. So I always struggle to tell the beginning of this story because I don't really have a memory of a time in my life where I wasn't dealing with some sort of chronic issue. I had infections since I was a baby. I was constantly on antibiotics. I was constantly in doctor's offices with different evolving symptoms throughout my childhood and college. But the symptom that really sent me over the edge, the issue that really became life defining, was chronic migraine. I had my first migraine in eighth grade, but by my mid 20s, I was basically in one long migraine. I was in daily pain. I would wake up each morning and basically wait until I could physically open my eyes, physically get out of bed. And if I could stand up, I decided that meant I was well enough to go about my life. And that was almost a decade of my life. I was sensitive to so many things. So, in addition to kind of this baseline level of pain, so many foods or scents or barometric pressure shifts or a stressful situation, exerting myself too much, just so many different things could send me into a fully debilitating migraine attack that would last for days. And I know so many folks have all of these different diagnoses, but basically they lumped all of my symptoms into migraine. So that also meant things like brain fog, anxiety, temporary aphasia. Sometimes I would not be able to think of very basic words, and just that chronic pain of the migraines.
Wow, it's so interesting. It seems like when I meet people who have chronic migraines, the medical system does not share with them a nervous system component. And I'll challenge them like, well, have you tried nervous system work? And they're like, well, no, that's not what this is from. Tell me about your experience about that, about not getting this answer probably for a long time. And how did you end up getting the conviction that chronic migraines might have something to do with your nervous system?
Yeah, so my mother, brother, aunt, and grandmother all have migraines. None of them as terrible as me, and many of them also have vertigo. So I was, deeply ingrained in this idea that my migraines were a genetic disorder. And there was really, I could hope that someone gave me a magic pill to fix this problem that was inherent in my body. But that was really how I experienced migraines through the medical system, that I had this genetic illness. And I would try other things. I was always very open minded. I went to acupuncture, which definitely supported me, even if it couldn't solve the process. And I tried all types of different healing modalities. But from the medical perspective, it was just let's throw all of the medicines at you. And of course, I was with my overactive nervous system, I just had all of the side effects to every medicine that I took and none of the relief. So it really was just a process of I was willing to try anything. I was so desperate because I was in pain for so long. And a friend mentioned that they had a friend who tried brain retraining. And I really had no idea what brain retraining was, but I knew that it was kind of based in these psychological and neurological principles. And I was in this period where I had taken medical leave and I was just devoted to kind of rebalancing my body. So, not the medical establishment, but my own inherent intuition was that there was something out of balance. Because even if it was genetic, I was experiencing it at a level that nobody in my family was experiencing, and something just felt out of balance in my body. Now I know that was my nervous system.
Oh my goodness. Wow, what a journey. And I'm so grateful to hear that you've been able to shift this because I know a lot of people with migraines that they just deal with it their whole life because they are not told to take this angle. What, okay, if this isn't fully genetic, what do you think was the setup for you to start having this issue?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And where I have landed is we are complex beings, physically, mentally, emotionally, and all of those inputs can stress the system. And so I think that there was a lot of different stressors. Yes, I had this genetic predisposition when stressed to express that in the form of migraines. But first of all, I was born, I think I was born with an infection, or I had an infection very early in infancy. So I was getting antibiotics from a very young age constantly because that's what they would do for all of my chronic infections. So I think being on antibiotics from a really young age was definitely a driver of an imbalance in my microbiome. We know that the stomach is where we create all of these important neurotransmitters, right? So all of these things are related, that mind body connection, that gut brain connection. So definitely, I think a lot of what the medical establishment was doing to support me, which was the best they had at the time, was actually creating these larger imbalances in my body. I think I'm a very sensitive person. I'm definitely a highly sensitive person. So just being in an environment where folks were prone to anxiety or there was a lot of dysregulation around me, I certainly felt that and responded to that. But it kind of, I think, became this cascade where I would have a medical problem. I would get put on some sort of uh, prescription medicine. It would create some other issue that would put me on a different medicine, and the imbalance physically spiraled, but also I wasn't learning any of the skills to actually regulate my nervous system, which I think we all need. And I always like to mention, like, I come from Jewish ancestry. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma in my ancestry. There's a lot of like baseline anxiety that is just, culturally normal at this point, but there's a lot of dysregulation that's just existing in the culture. And so I think there was this baseline level of anxiety and dysregulation that I kind of lived in and didn't understand, didn't have to be that way.
Wow. How is your family, speaking of the ancestry, has this helped to shift anything for them since so many members deal with this? Or are you still like the lone sheep doing the nervous system work for this issue?
Yeah, my family has always been really supportive of me and whatever path I take. I think that one of the things that I've really realized is a lot of times it takes us hitting that rock bottom before we're willing to take this deeper work, this difficult path of healing. Like, healing is a lot of work, Dr. Kat, right? It's beautiful work. I'm so grateful I did this work, but it's work, it's effort. And only those of us who are in this community really know everything we have done to get here. And so I think they're open minded to it, but because it doesn't impact them in the way that it impacts me, I don't think that they've really felt compelled to do that work in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple questions to understand how you have evolved the way that your body basically processes stress. And I'm sure it started with nervous system regulation on some level, brain retraining, all that. I want to ask about that. But I'm also so curious about your internal processing system, or how you handle trauma, that on a systemic level, that pressure is it's dealt with differently than when you were having migraines. From my understanding, a lot of migraine has a lot to do with our vascular pumping mechanisms, how we're processing the pressures in our body. So two questions. Let's first of all talk about how you got into the nervous system work, and then from there, what the inner work or the inner transformation was like.
Yeah. So I also just want to caveat also one more thing that I think contributed. It was just being in really high stress environments. I don't think it was just a fluke that my migraines really took off when I was in law school, which is an extremely stressful and oftentimes dysregulating environment. So I always like to mention stress was absolutely a component. And I don't think just getting out of a stressful situation could have ever solved my migraines, but certainly that was a huge component. So I always like to say the stress is definitely a big part too. But yes, coming back to your question of just like getting into the nervous system regulation state, I think it came as I started brain retraining. Brain retraining for me was this huge, monumental aha moment that my conscious capacity to shift the state of my nervous system, to shift the state of my brain, would result in a biological shift internally. And that was just information that I never received before, and it clicked so instantly. I have a very specific memory of learning about this idea and then going to a yoga class. And yoga class is supposed to be this place of calming bliss. And I noticed that I sat in the yoga class thinking about stressors the entire time. Oh no, is this going to hurt my neck? Oh no, the person next to me is wearing perfume. They have the window open and there's allergens outside. Can I handle the exertion of this position? And so even though I'm in this beautiful yoga space, I'm supposed to be calm, I'm seeing how my thought patterns are actually keeping me trapped in this state of stress. And so for me, it just clicked, it made sense. And from there, I was really able to run with this idea of using my conscious mind to impact my body. And then I think really it wasn't until I came into Primal Trust that I started to understand, okay, it's not just the brain, it's the whole nervous system, understanding polyvagal theory, understanding a broader approach than just thinking about this one part of my brain that was responsible for stress.
Wow. I love that you've helped explain what it's like to have an overactive limbic system when people don't realize it's just normal to have these thoughts all over the place while we're trying to do yoga. And I think it's fascinating when we look at that list of signs you might have a limbic system impairment. You know, you're always future forecasting, you're thinking about things. I remember reading that list myself, being like, check, check, check. I do all of these things. I didn't know that's not how everybody lived their life inside their head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have so much compassion for myself and for all of us too, because of course we're going to do that if our systems are so sensitive. Like that protection makes so much sense because the allergens and the scents and the exertion, they were all unsafe when I didn't understand that they weren't the problem.
Yes. Yeah, such a big revelation because you didn't understand yet that the things you were told were the problem by the medical system and practitioners were not the root. They're always saying, oh, your root cause is this sensitivity to X, Y, and Z. Your root
Yeah.
cause is you're sensitive to gluten. And, you know, obviously in Primal Trust, we're looking for the root cause because you get so many root causes on this journey. So
Yeah.
for you, what do you feel like was your root cause? I know you've said it, but just to reframe.
Yeah, I think what I would say is it was I feel like I came in with a little bit of a physical imbalance and added to that a lack of tools. The way I see it is that we all should be given the same way we learn to like eat a healthy, balanced diet. We should all just be handed a basic toolkit of how to be a regulated human, right? And so yes, I think that part of the root cause was definitely this physical imbalance. And I know sometimes it's like a little controversial in this world because everybody wants it to be really simple. And where I landed is like, actually, we're physical, we're emotional, we're mental, all these pieces come together. And I think that physical imbalance was real. But I also think that I just moved through a world that happens to be very stressful and has a lot of dysregulated spaces without the tools to manage it. And over time, that spiraled in all of these ways to create this really overwhelming and life encompassing illness.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I do think it's multifaceted. I know there's, let's just brain retrain our way out of everything. And while that's an incredible tool, our body has a lot of needs, including clean water, healthy food, good
Yeah,
environment, good relationships. It's multifaceted, and all of those things play into our nervous system and vice versa. Yeah.
right. Absolutely. Right.
So
Yeah.
tell people the various lifestyle changes that you did make, including the nervous system work. So for those who are listening and they resonate.
Yeah, so I will share them kind of in and how I think of them happening in order during this period of time when I went on medical leave and kind of did what I called my healing employment instead of my fun employment. I decided to. So the first thing I did was this microbiome diet. That was the first thing that I had this knowledge that my microbiome was completely imbalanced because of all of my food sensitivities and all of the antibiotics that I had taken. And also, I know that it would have been harder for me personally to believe the brain retraining if I hadn't done that physical microbiome healing first. Does that mean I couldn't have done it? No, I can't know. I just know that my system believed there was a physical issue, and so dealing with that was really supportive for me. So um, going on that microbiome, but also just learning how to eat a healthy diet that supports our microbiome with probiotics and the fibers and all of these things that just any human being would like to prioritize in their body. So that was kind of my step one. And then I found brain retraining, and I had a very devoted brain retraining practice. And
What
I
does that
really
mean?
yeah, so for me, that meant doing what we call these rounds, which, if you haven't got into brain retraining yet, I always like to say is basically like a self guided meditation to calm the nervous system, especially if we've been exposed to some sort of triggering event or experience. And I did my practice for an hour every single day for a year. I still do rounds most mornings because I think they're powerful and I appreciate their impacts. But also watching my thoughts throughout the day, right? So if I'm in yoga and I'm noticing those thought patterns happening, catching them and disrupting those patterns and choosing to consciously put myself into situations that support calmness, support safety, and support regulation. So that also included prioritizing relationships at the time that made me feel safe and cared for, and people were honoring that I was choosing not to talk about the news or stressful experiences because I was really just creating what I liked to call my little healing cocoon of safety. And so the brain retraining piece was huge. And I love how in Primal Trust you've created those basic regulate practices before you step into Primal Trust, because before I could have done any of that really deep work, I needed to just know how to find safety in my system. And I think it had been so long before I felt that basic feeling of okayness inside me, that just feeling like I was actually safe and okay was so profound. That sense of hope and like I actually have what I need. And so once I was able to create that through that top-down mind approach, um, then I was kind of ready to do this deeper work. So I always say I reached this point where I had integrated so many foods. I used to not even be able to be in a room where someone had washed their hands with Myers soap. I could go use Myers soap, which for me was like this huge revelation because it's a very popular soap, right? So I had incorporated all these scents. I could go up to altitude. I've gone up to really high altitudes. I could run, I could exert my body, but I was finding that my emotional capacity, my capacity to handle stress, my deeper way of moving through the world was so limited. I had created this tiny little cocoon and I was having a lot of trouble getting out of my tiny cocoon. And that's when somebody recommended Primal Trust to me, because at the time that was its own mentorship, right? It was way back in the beginning. And so that was this huge aha moment where I was able to take what had really been a like a physical focused journey, focused on the physical, environmental triggers, into a deeper work where I started to do that work of understanding my emotional triggers, where I learned about parts work and understanding these different aspects of me that have these different needs, and really creating a capacity for deeper relationship to myself. And at that same time, I also was doing a lot of Enneagram work. And the Enneagram has also been a really beautiful place for me to do deeper work and understanding of where I get caught up, where I get triggered. And so that deeper emotional, personal, self healing inner work was this critically important place. And then I started to have the capacity to go out and expend my energy on things that weren't just my own healing, right? And so then I got to say, I want to bring this to other people. I want to share, I want to spread this knowledge and wisdom and teachings. And then I got to add in living my purpose. And that's something that I loved, about Primal Trust, was that it wasn't just focused on getting better, fixing the problem. It was actually focused on creating a life that was in alignment with who I wanted to be. And so for me, it was kind of moving from the physical to the self, to the relational and emotional and deeper personal, and then out into the purpose.
Wow. What do you feel like was the big leap that helped you go from being so sensitive in your cocoon to out? Was it the Enneagram work, Primal Trust, a combination? Because that's a threshold point that a lot of people do recover in their safety bubble, and then they come into Primal Trust and they're like, I've brain retrained, but I can't do anything other than live in my little bubble. And if I live in my bubble, I'm
Yes.
fine. So talk about breaking the bubble a little more, because I think it's super important.
Yeah, I love that way of thinking about breaking the bubble. And it's kind of my favorite place to work with folks, is when they're like really ready to go back out into the world and like become their whole beautiful, alive selves that give back. And um, I think fundamentally part of it for me, and maybe this just worked to my advantage, was once I understood what journey I was on, I was like ready for the next step. I was always impatient to like get my life back. I remember I thought that I was going to like do 6 months of healing and then travel the world on an international trip. Like I really just wanted to get back out there. So anything that was going to get me closer to getting back out there, I was ready for. And I started Primal Trust in a moment where I was ready for the deeper emotional work, right? I'd really created a lot of capacity through the top-down brain retraining to regulate my system, so I could bring myself skillfully to the edges of what felt okay. But even from the beginning, I think I'm just quite lucky that I didn't have huge resistance to Primal Trust. Like the concepts, they just made sense to me in the same way that brain retraining just clicked for me. And so I think for me, I've always had like if something makes sense to me, um, rationally, logically, like then I will move through all of the ick to like make it actually possible to do. But I can't tell you exactly why that was like an easier transition for me than other people.
I want to divert a little bit and talk about the Enneagram because that lights me up, and it's not something I often talk about in these interviews, but since we're here and you happen to be also an expert at it, I personally just want to say I found great help with the Enneagram. Before I had done brain retraining, I had an Enneagram mentor. I think it's amazing. I think it was so helpful for me to see personally. It's a typing system, and for those of you who aren't interested, it's a very cool system. It helped me to see where I was getting hung up in life, what my shadow self might look like when I'm getting into that side, and what a more evolved self could look like. So it gave me direction. I'm a typed as a 4. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a 1 though. You know, yes, we change. Like maybe I'm living more of my oneness lately, but yeah. So I love it. Why don't you share a little bit more about the Enneagram, how it impacted your life, why you like working with it, and for those that might resonate, you know, they can obviously learn from you about this.
Yeah, I love the Enneagram. I always like to say the Enneagram is not just another personality typing system. It really evolved out of a spiritual tool for growth, right? It's not just to put a label on ourselves, oh, I'm an introvert or an extrovert, and then move through our lives. As you said, it is a map that shows us these shockingly predictable patterns about how we behave when we are really present to ourselves, these beautiful higher selves that we get to inhabit and be. And what happens when we kind of fall down the ladder away from presence, when we start to be run more by fear, by egoic fear, how we end up actually getting in our own way and making our fears come true, which is so interesting how we can do that in 9 completely distinct ways. There's 9 different Enneagram types. And so the Enneagram, what makes it so powerful is it kind of lifts the curtain from what we see in our personality to understanding the deeper motivations and the things that we don't want to see. It just shows us. And so we get to notice it, and it gives us more to work with to notice when we're kind of going down that unhelpful path. So actually, just as an example, I'm a type 7. Type 7s are enthusiasts. We like to go out and experience the world and do fun things and create joy. And it wasn't until I learned about the Enneagram, which was actually many years before I started my, this deeper healing. I was reading about it and I learned, oh, there's this thing, anxiety, that's running the type 7. I didn't even know I had anxiety, which, if anyone knows me well, Dr. Kat, is a little bit shocking. I didn't even know I was anxious because my egoic patterns were so strong in focusing me in my perception of my joyful self. Seeing my anxiety meant I got to work with my anxiety. We can't work on something we don't know is there. And so the Enneagram is just like actually that example you said, like, here's a list of things that you might be doing if you're limbic, and here's these thoughts. Well, I didn't even know those thoughts were going on. How am I supposed to work on them? Same thing with the Enneagram. It's just this list of patterns and habits and places we get stuck. And now I can say, oh, I'm doing that thing again. And then I can lovingly bring myself back to a better way of supporting myself and actually getting what I want on a deeper level.
I love that. You had so many little pearls of wisdom in that. And I love, especially lovingly bringing ourselves back rather than shaming, like, oh, I'm falling into the shadow. It's a loving, yeah, it's a balancing scale, and it's always keeping us aware of where we might be going on that scale of balance. And we're always going to we're always going to do this a little bit in our life.
Yeah, and it's designed to create that movement. You mentioned, like, oh, I feel more 1. Well, type 4s, when they are healthy, have this beautiful line to 1. That's where they become their highest, they like show some of their highest, best selves. So the fact that you're feeling into your 1, Dr. Kat, to me doesn't say you're switching numbers. To me, it says you're really doing the work of your type and becoming your highest, best version of yourself.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I definitely was really into the shadow part of my four for many years. So for those who know me, like, yeah, I didn't know that it was wasn't, yeah, drama and self, deep self, I was just in my stories and like to share them for years. And they were before brain retraining. They had a different twist. They
Yeah.
were all a woe is me story. So it was a
Yeah.
very deep foreshadow. So that's really cool. And so people who might be interested, this is something that you also help people with. Tell us a little more about that.
Yes. Yeah, I do an intro series for folks who are interested in learning about the Enneagram, where I will take them through as they find their type and then teaching them how to use their type. So we'll go through a coaching session, but we'll bring the Enneagram type in as like the informational foundation of a coaching session. So people create those same. Every coaching session ends with an action step. It ends with bringing something into the real world, but that's being motivated and driven from this deeper foundational knowledge of the type work. And so we're not just learning about this thing, because I think one of the biggest traps that I've seen almost everyone have to navigate with healing from any sort of illness or issue is like we want to just learn about it. We want to like know everything as if that's going to actually give us this deeper healing. And the knowledge is not wisdom, right? And so the way that I've structured this is to actually bring these ideas of the Enneagram into practice, into wisdom, so we can actually feel what it means to embody the higher sides of our structure.
Mm. And where do you think people need to be on their nervous system healing journey to start incorporating Enneagram work personally?
So I think that there's different ways of working with the Enneagram, and there's different kind of levels that you can use it, right? Does that make sense? So there's certain topics that you maybe would go towards more when you're at a more advanced stage. But pretty early on, I think it would be helpful to understand some of the more basic aspects. And then maybe as you create more resilience in your system, then you can start to do the deeper work. And I can give like a quick example if that's
Yeah,
helpful.
sure.
So, type sevens, we tend to want to try and do everything, right? We are FOMO, okay, when we're stuck in the personality. So it would be helpful for anyone to kind of start to notice FOMO, to start to notice doing too much, to start to notice trying to stay outside of our own internal experience. At any level, that would be helpful work. Some of the deeper work for the type 7 is getting out of our heads and getting deeply into our bodies, feeling all of our feelings, even the more difficult emotional stuff. Maybe you don't do that immediately. Maybe we don't start to work on how do we express and feel grief at the beginning. We can leave that. And so there's always deeper, deeper, deeper levels. Just like we find with any healing, there's always these layers of the onion so that we can keep going deeper as we heal.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know, people are here listening to your recovery, but I think it's also a great opportunity for people to find more tools to
Yeah.
make this journey at least interesting. And I know for me personally, like just doing the nervous system work, while that was great, I liked bringing in tools like the Enneagram as a map to at least, I don't know, make it more of an exciting movie of recovery than just brain retraining and, polyvagal theory and things like that. So, yeah, I just second this work. And if you have a peek, Meredith she's presented in our community. She's done a wonderful job in presenting the Enneagram. So please seek her out for that. So, okay. I don't know where we're at with our story, but what else would you like to share about your recovery process and things that you brought in to help with your healing?
Yeah, I think, oh man, there's so many beautiful things. I think what I would like to say is one of the most powerful things for me, and I think this was something that I really started to deepen in when I was in Primal Trust, was this where, okay, I'm going to say it this way. when we are learning about brain retraining and the dysregulated nervous system, what I think about it as is like we're learning to like quiet the noise of the overactive stress response and the hyper vigilant system. And we're trying to quiet that all down so we can have the absence of symptoms, or that's what we're doing when we start before we get out of fix it and, understand, right? We want to kind of experience the absence of this stressful input. But as we start to quiet that down, the goal is then to start to listen to that deeper, wiser inner, I call it inner compass. That's why I created my coaching practice called Inner Compass Health, that knowing of what is true for us, right? And I think Primal Trust created such a beautiful map for starting to access what my inner compass said by learning my values, by understanding those parts, right? But deeper down, I think we we live in a medical system and a society that wants us to trust experts and learn from others about how to do everything. But for me, one of the deepest parts of this work was actually learning how to trust myself, how to trust the wisdom of my body in telling me what it needs, what it wants, what makes sense for me. And that is such an important thing, is to start to believe in our own capacity to decide those things.
So, speaking of this, how do you trust a body that in the past the message is this symptom means something is wrong, to moving
Yeah.
into trust the body that this symptom maybe doesn't mean something's wrong, but yeah, let's talk about that quantum leap of trusting our messages.
Yeah, I think, it's kind of like learning what the voices, for lack of a better word, like where they're coming from, and understanding that, right? So maybe perhaps one way of thinking about that is understanding the fear-based impulses versus these like deeper, wiser, more authentic based impulses. And I think this is where the parts work was just so transformational for me. Dr. Cat, which was such an important component in Primal Trust, was once I started to work with my parts at a really deep level. And I did actually go and work with a parts work therapist because I just loved the parts work. It was so rich and powerful for me. But once I started to know my parts, then I knew where these impulses were coming from. Were they coming from a need for control? Were they coming from a need for safety? Were they coming from these different things? And they could feel the energy of kind of that limbic or dysregulated or fearful part, which is such a different resonance from a part and from like this deeper me that is just says, this is what is right. This is what I need. This is what I want. And it's something that I carry throughout my day. And just to like bring that to life, because I think we have this idea, I think a lot of people have this idea that we're going to heal and then we're just going to be normal people who go about life and like don't worry about our body anymore and like have no symptoms. And being a healthy person does still mean I have a body that gives me messages when I'm out of alignment. So just as an example, like we're going on a trip, right? I have a lot of things I need to get done. I have a part that gets very anxious before I travel, right? That comes up. And my husband really wanted to go down to the South Bay to visit some dear family friends right before the trip, right? So there's this decision of, do I stay home and pack and get everything organized so that I can feel safe and prepared? Or do I do this thing that really matters, to my husband? And it's such a simple little moment. And that's why I love it, because it's so mundane and uninteresting. But this is where like the deepest work I think happens. And so it's my capacity to sit down and look at my list and feel stress that I don't have enough time, and honor that that's kind of an old dysregulated pathway, but it's not really wisdom. And then feel the wisdom of what I know it means to cultivate important relationships, and, and know that that's not me people pleasing, right? That's not me just giving into to something that's not right. It's actually me honoring the wisdom that I have time, I can handle this, and I'm going to choose to do that.
And how I love all this and I relate so much. Aaron and I are the same but in reverse. I'm the wild crazy. Let's just do a million things as we about to get on a plane. He's like, "No, the order, the list, the." And so I get that. But what I want to ask is what is it like when you choose your higher wisdom of like, let's go see this family, but a part is kind of kicking and screaming. What's that experience like and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I think that has been such an evolution. And I think it's kind of why it's so beautiful to do this so many years after first learning Primal Trust, because that experience was really different in 2021 than it is in 2024. Because fundamentally, when we've started to create a system that trusts us to balance, then there is less kicking and screaming because I can really reach this place of, I can handle this. This is the right choice for me. And um, then I can tend a little bit to that background feeling, but it's not so big, right? It's just like maybe this little like tickle that I can tend to and notice and bring compassion to, but it's not so big like it used to feel. And that's what's so cool about being years down the road.
Wow, I love that. And that's such a great description. You're still having to tend to the part of you um,
Yeah.
that wants to stay organized and not add any complexity while you're going off and living your wisdom. And that both, we call that in Primal Trust, holding the tensions of the opposites. And it's something that we have to do. And a lot of people want to do this work, parts work, brain retraining, to get rid of the part that gets stressed out and to only feel good all the time. I don't know. For me, that's not the reality. I doubt you'd say that's the reality that we end up retraining out of all of our resistance.
Yeah, I think I kind of reached this place where I really acknowledge that a lot that even this planner part, I mean, we can relate this back to the Enneagram, right? That the type 7 loves to plan. That's how they ensure joy, right? So just a sense of how you can use the work in so many places. That part, that aspect of me does so many beautiful things. It plans amazing trips, right? When we go on a trip, my husband says, I know I don't have to worry because you put all these pieces together, right? So that is part of a skill. And so I could almost reframe it as we're learning to use our skills and strategies when they benefit us, and we're learning to put them aside when they're not supportive. And there's some parts that don't seem to have much purpose or use, and so maybe those are harder. But in most cases, I feel like they our strengths are also our weaknesses, and so we're just coming into relationship with these different aspects of us and finding where they belong.
And I probably should have asked this at the beginning, but how would you define what parts and parts work is for those who haven't heard about it before?
Yeah, so I think intuitively we have all said there's a part of me that thinks I should take this job, and there's a part of me that thinks I should go find something better. Or we have this sense of these different aspects of us with different priorities, different strategies, different instincts. And so parts work is really just about honoring each of those individual aspects of ourselves, strategies, however you like to think about them, and kind of giving them their own space and attention. And what's so powerful, and I think, part of the Primal Trust work was creating a little bit of distance from those parts so we can actually feel out into what actually feels aligned in the moment instead of feeling taken along for the ride by a strategy that's tended to dominate. And so it's just a way of separating all of these different pieces out that makes it much more digestible.
Mm, great. I love that. And for those listening, Richard Schwartz has a book called No Bad Parts. He's the one
Yes.
that really coined the model of internal family systems. And that's where a lot of this work comes in. And also, another thing I find highly valuable for those on the nervous system healing journey to look into. So,
Yes.
so now I know one of your expertise, Meredith, is helping people get back to work. So talk about your process of getting back to work, what you had to go through with your nervous system, and why this lights you up to help others do the same.
Yeah, I love this. So this is like that bursting of the bubble, right? And it's
Yeah.
such an amazing moment when, and I always like to just caveat, not everybody gets to stop working and stop having responsibilities to get better. Like some people, that's just not realistic. And if you're one of those people, I just want to pause to say you can still get better. This is not everybody's journey. But for a lot of us, we have to, like our systems don't allow us really, like we reach a point where all there is the capacity to take care of ourselves. And it feels like that is a full-time job just to do the things that I need to do to take care of me. And I kept waiting as I was going through the months for myself to reach a point where there was like a little bit of space or even instinct or inclination to want to do something more. And I remember having this fear, like, what if I never want to do anything again other than care for myself? And it did take longer than I thought it would. But I, I did reach this place where there was capacity, where there was this extra energy. And I so wanted to go out into the world and create and do with that energy. And and yet that transition, that shift of attention is scary because part of how we've created safety is by creating the cocoon. That's how it's part of how we created safety. And then part of how we have to create the life that we want to live is by coming out of the cocoon. And that's a huge transition. And it's also kind of this wax on, wax off Mr. Miyagi moment because everything we learned in brain retraining, everything we learned in parts and primal trust, it all applies to the real world, but it's like just a different version. And so translating that was so intense for me. I remember I just started a coaching program. It was 12 hours a week. And 12 hours a week, I had been doing 60, 80-hour weeks as a lawyer. So 12 hours a week felt like it should have been nothing. And it was so intense for me. It was so hard to create that much space. It was exhausting. And I had to reorient so much. That was such a big transition. And I just see other people kind of, they create this whole wellness package, this whole cocoon. And then it's like, where's my off ramp? How does this relate to real life? I want to just leave the healing journey behind and go back to quote unquote real life. And so it's how do we translate and update everything we've learned into something that makes sense while we're going out and living and giving and serving and continuing to take care of ourselves. And for many of us, that's something we never did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. I love that you're now able to share and help so many people do the exact same thing. And it is another part of the journey. It's not just about regulation, but I also want to point out that you didn't go back to your old life. You're not a lawyer. You did something completely different. It's like a
Yeah.
true transformation. All that work for law school and you let it go. That must have been
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. I think part of it was it didn't feel necessarily permanent. And I actually sometimes do a little bit of environmental contract work on the side. Um, Climate change and environmental issues are still so near and dear to my heart. But fundamentally, I am driven by this deep belief that like we can create more balance in this world, that we can create more sustainability in this world. And I think if we can internally heal, then we will have a very different impact on this world, right? And so I still think of the work that I do as being activism. I still think of the work that I'm doing as being really deeply powerful and revolutionary. So I work with brain retrainers who are kind of looking for that off ramp, who are ready to like step back into life or work, even if they're not going back to a job. Like I work with retired brain retrainers who just want to create their life. But I also work with professionals who haven't gone down that spiral yet, right? And helping them have the tools that they need um, to kind of balance this, let's take care of me and be out in the world. So I never stopped caring about that issue, and I still sometimes think about how I will continue to bring environmentalism into my work, but I think fundamentally I still see myself as doing this deeper healing work that I always saw myself doing. And I always, again, coming back to this enthusiast, everything's possible. I never foreclose what might happen in the future and where I might end up working. And it feels really beautiful to get to support people who are in that type of meaningful work too in the meantime.
It's so beautiful, and this has been such a great testimony on the process of the possibility of shifting chronic migraines that have been there since you were a child, and chronic sensitivities that have been there since you were a child. I mean, a lot of people end up getting this, and it's like, oh, I've had it for a year or two. Can it change? It's been so long. I think Meredith is an example that, of course, it can change. It can change then when it's been a lifetime, and that's amazing. And I hope that this knowledge continues to get into the medical system. Here is what's possible with genetic migraines that may have a tipping point genetically, epigenetically. And we are powerful beings to be able to shift our genetic expression. So, Meredith, I want to end with a couple things. First of all, um, share maybe a word of wisdom of if there is anything you would have done differently or anything you want to say to somebody who's just starting out that has a similar thing. Just last bit word of wisdom coming from you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just not to wait. I I think it's so easy to just try to keep pushing through our lives the way that they are. And so don't wait. This work is amazing. I always say to people, worst case scenario, if this doesn't fix your symptoms, but you're a more resilient, happier, more aligned, more values driven person, then it was probably still worth it. So, really, for me, the biggest thing is there's no too early to start to actually take on our power. And that's what this is really all about. And then the other thing that I would absolutely recommend people do is create an incremental list of successes, like of things that you want to be able to do, and start really small and go really big. Because I did that at one point, and there was nothing cooler than being able to go back and look down the list and watch how far I had come. Because as humans, we really forget what it was like before. And so it's so powerful to just honor all the little steps along the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
love that. And then lastly, a little like specific person that you love working with. So who do you love working with and coaching with? And just give a little elevator pitch, if you will.
Oh, I mean, I would absolutely recommend going into Primal Trust. I know that's why we're here, but I think one of the most important things about this work is finding community and finding a place of safety. And my healing fundamentally transformed when I found community to heal alongside of. And yes, that can look like a formal platform like Primal Trust, but it can also look like a WhatsApp group of friends who get together and do laughter yoga. It is so powerful to actually just surround yourselves with people who are choosing to do this work, who are choosing to change their life, who are taking on their power and getting to rise together. And so that's not exactly an answer. I'm cheating, but I think that is really one of the most magical and powerful things we can do is support each other as we grow.
And what type of person do you love to support yourself with your coaching business?
I love to support folks who are already in the work. They already have the basic foundation, but they are ready to take it further. And I love working with folks as a person who is passionate. And I love working with folks who are passionate, who want to get out there, who want to be, give and do and change and create. And so this deeper healing work is really all about being able to live our own version of that.
I love that. I'm going to drop how to get a hold of Meredith in the show notes below this. So if you resonate with her or the Enneagram or you want to learn more, you can get a hold of her. I will also drop a link for, we have a free book called How Healing Happens, which is basically like a free mini level 1 Primal Trust course. It's like 127 pages. You can download it for free. So if you're new to this, you can check out this work for free and get started. So I'll put both of those links below. And Meredith, thank you for joining us, for sharing so many pearls of wisdom. This has been an excellent interview, and I am just so happy to see you in the world, living your 7 and giving back. It's amazing for me to watch.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kat. And I forgot to mention, I do specifically work with brain retrainers going back to work. So if you're in that exciting moment where you're going back to work, definitely that's a really exciting place to work. I'm just so grateful to be here, and I'm so glad that you are out there sharing all of your wisdom and learnings. So thank you for having me here today.
You're welcome. And I'll just give a shout out. Meredith has taught in our community several times. She's an excellent mentor. If you are looking for somebody to help coach you back into work, I highly recommend her. So, yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Kat.